Avernus is the first layer of the Nine Hells, one of the 16 outer planes in the D&D multiverse, and it plays an important, if somewhat peripheral role in Baldur's Gate 3, especially in the beginning of the game, and later as it pertains to Karlach. But I don't think the average Baldur's Gate 3 player understands why Avernus is important in the context of the Nine Hells, and indeed the greater multiverse. There's one recurrent theme when it comes to Avernus, and that is the Blood War. But before we go there, some basic facts. Avernus is the first layer of the total 9 layers of the greater outer plane called the Nine Hells, also sometimes known as Beator. The Nine Hells is the plane of existence that represents the perfect fusion of the alignment concept of law and evil, and all that is derived from that. It is the origin of tyranny, totalitarianism, and organized evil. And lawful evil souls, when they die, pass on to the Nine Hells to be reborn, and with enough luck and skill, ascend the infernal hierarchy of devil kind and become devils themselves. Each of the 9 layers of the Hells represents something slightly different in terms of the flavor of its lawful evil nature, often embodied by its geology and landscape. Avernus is the largest layer in the 9 Hells, although technically the outer planes are infinite, and the layer of Avernus corresponds to what mortals most readily think of when they imagine the Hells. It's a place of fire and brimstone, a literal hellscape, shot through by rivers of lava and rocky mountains, barren landscapes, and desolated, empty spaces that extend out as far as the eye can see. The ground itself is difficult and at times impossible to traverse because it is littered with jagged rocks and minerals, such as obsidian and quartz, that can easily slice apart travelers who are not careful, preventing most from moving about the plane at anything other than a brisk pace, as running is nigh impossible. The rocky and scarred landscape appears to house the tormented forms and faces of creatures and souls that have been lost to the plane, whether by conflict or by more insidious means. Fireballs constantly streak across the forever darkened sky of Avernus, which has neither stars, nor sun, nor moon, scorching the earth, leaving behind massive craters, ashen and charred corpses, and worse, all of which makes traveling through Avernus impossible at times, as travelers are forced to seek shelter from the firestorm that threatens to burn them to cinders. And one thing, above all, is consistent and persistent on Avernus: blood. The blood of the river Styx, and the blood of the countless millennia of war and conflict, from the blood war waged between devils and demons to every bit of suffering inflicted and endured upon Avernus. Now, in general, the first layer of an outer plane is in some sense its most important, because that layer is also the first entry point to the plane. Other portals may exist to other layers, but for the most part, those that wish to enter a plane do so through the first layer. And for this reason, the denizens of any plane pay special attention to its first layer. This situation, interestingly enough, has been dialed up to 11 in the case of the Nine Hells, as Asmodeus has officially banned any portals to the Nine Hells other than those on Avernus. Thus, although Asmodeus, the ruler of the Nine Hells, and the most powerful archdevil, resides and rules from Nessus, the 9th and deepest layer, he is more than aware of the strategic importance of Avernus, and therefore pays special attention to it. And this concern ultimately boils down to the Blood War. Should Avernus ever be conquered, and there have been some close calls in its history, the progress of the enemy forces would be significantly slowed down by the fact that portals within the Hells only lead from one layer to the next. Now, in actuality, this isn't quite true, as there are hidden portals to other layers, but very, very few beings actually know of them, let alone can use them, as they are typically very difficult to access. For most beings and creatures, Avernus is the way you enter the Nine Hells, and that's it. Speaking of the Blood War, it is without question the most important aspect of Avernus, inasmuch as when the war comes to the Hells, it comes to Avernus first, and is waged on the first layer. This war representing the eternal conflict between devils and demons. Now, I've already spoken at some length on the Blood War in a separate video, but it is important to again stress why the Blood War is so critical. And the long and short of it is that everyone, whether good or evil, has their eyes on the Blood War and its outcome, and everyone is worried about it, albeit for different reasons. Without the Blood War, Avernus would only be of middling importance. But since the Blood War is waged on this layer, it behooves us to understand why everyone regards the Blood War as important. From the perspective of the devils and demons, the Blood War is important as it represents the fundamental core argument about how evil ought to be pursued and carried out in the multiverse. Should it be methodical, and organized, as per the devils, or should it be pursued with passion and wanton savagery, as per the demons? This is, of course, a philosophical question, but even more so, a practical one, as the winner of the Blood War also wins that argument. And this is the reason why the powers of good pay such close attention to the Blood War, because it's ultimately to everyone's benefit that the demons and devils fight it out with each other, as it tends to keep them preoccupied with each other rather than the powers of good and even the mortal world. Now, Avernus is also important for another reason, but even that reason is tied to the Blood War. Asmodeus has shrewdly molded Avernus into an effective political tool to keep his subordinates distracted and draw their attention away from other ambitions. The title of Archduke of Avernus has been one coveted by many powerful devils over the eons, in particular because of all the layers to rule. It is the most accessible in some sense. This is by no means to say that any rank-and-file devil can simply march up to the center of Avernus and plant a flag there and claim it to be his domain. Far from it. But the other layers have rulers that, shall we say, are less liable to being deposed or dethroned, although it has happened under very specific circumstances. Now, the history of rulership of Avernus is actually quite confusing, in large measure due to Wizards of the Coast constantly retconning their own history and contradicting themselves. The most recent sources claim that the dragon goddess Tiamat was originally an archdevil, and the archdevil who ruled Avernus for untold millennia, whose task it was to prevent rebellious devils from becoming a threat. But apparently she failed in this task and was demoted by Asmodeus. However, traditionally, historically, and in most lore, Tiamat was always a goddess of evil chromatic dragon kind, and a member of the Draconic Pantheon, and therefore personally I would stick with this piece of lore since it has a much longer track record. And using the same historical record, the archdevil and pit fiend Bel was, for the longest time, the Lord of Avernus. He replaced some unknown previous ruler, millennia ago, that he had rebelled against. And because of Bel's keen interest in prosecuting the Blood War, Asmodeus was able to kill two birds with one stone. On the one hand, he got an archdevil whose primary interest it was to wage the Blood War, something most archdevils typically have minimal interest in. And on the other hand, precisely because of Bel's interest in the war, Bel would likely have neither the time nor the desire to plot and attempt to supplant or rebel against Asmodeus. This arrangement seemed to be a win-win for all involved. Bel remained the ruler of Avernus for countless millennia, and a favorite of Asmodeus until comparatively recently. In 1354 DR, when the solar Zario fell to the forces of the Nine Hells, Asmodeus was so impressed with her that he granted her the title of Archduchess, and rulership of the layer was granted to Zariel, who, rather uncoincidentally, was also obsessed with the Blood War. And Bel was consigned to an advisory role, during which period he plotted and temporarily managed to oust Zariel, taking control of the layer for himself again, siphoning off Zariel's power whilst torturing her. A situation that recently changed when Asmodeus announced his displeasure with Bel, whereupon Zariel was once again reinstated, with Bel in the same advisory role as before, and predictably plotting her downfall, yet again. Ultimately, both Bel and Zariel spent far too much time thinking about the Blood War, and less about the politics of the Nine Hells, which suits Asmodeus perfectly. So you can see that practically everything about Avernus revolves around the Blood War, from its many scarred battlefields to its very rulers. The Blood War is the driving force behind Avernus, and in some sense we mortals should all be grateful. Asmodeus gets what he wants, and the rulers of Avernus, through their own self-interest and blindness, will continue to guard us against the forces of the Abyss, or at least limit their action, inadvertently doing us all a favor. It's no wonder that Karlach was conscripted for the express purpose of fighting powerful archdevils, had been led around by the nose by Asmodeus, driven by their obsession with the war, distracting them from other issues and goals, something that ultimately redounds to the benefit of Asmodeus, the ruler of the Nine Hells. And all this makes it far more understandable as to why Karlach, in some cases, would prefer to be incinerated rather than to go back to Avernus. It's simply an absolutely terrible option for her, not just because of Zariel, but because of the nature of the plane itself. I certainly would not recommend visiting the place on vacation. There are, after all, much nicer places out there, especially in the Outer Planes. And for the record, much worse places too. Thanks for watching. But before I go, I'd like to invite you to my Discord server, where you can discuss Baldur's Gate 3 with like-minded people, as well as many other RPGs. And as always, thank you for tuning in. If you like my content, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, and you can hit the bell icon to be notified of my videos. It'd be much appreciated, as it really helps out my channel. and I'll check you out next time. Take care.